Hey guys, Pastor Trey here with Pastor Ryan, and we thank you for tuning in to our YouTube channel and trying to catch up on our most recent sermon. Yesterday we ran into some audio difficulty in the recording, and so when we got it online, the sermon wasn't actually there. So today we just kind of wanted to take an opportunity to let you know kind of what was going on in the sermon and what we were talking about and what we were doing, and so that's what this video is about. So as we've been in our series about under construction, we've walked through a lot of different characters, but today we started looking at the character of Moses. Moses is a really interesting character, and actually we're not only going to look at him today, but we're going to talk about him for the following 3 weeks as well. And so we just kind of kick off here with Exodus chapter 2 and chapter 3. Chapter 2 is where Moses is born. We kind of get that story of where after birth, he was put into a basket and floated down the river, and he was found by the Pharaoh's daughter and taken in as Pharaoh's grandchild, more or less, and kind of raised in that. But then there's this event that happens about halfway through the chapter there where Moses sees one of his Hebrew brethren is being mistreated by one of Pharaoh's slave drivers, I guess is the best way to talk about that. And he kills the slave driver, which takes him on the run. Now, in the sermon, there were just a couple things that kind of jumped out to me. I know you can't see it in the background where we're looking. We have the PowerPoint so that I can kind of remember where we went through yesterday. But in one of the terms, there's some kind of concepts that are sparked in Exodus 2. And so if you want to hit pause on us and take a minute, just kind of read through that. We read through it in the NIV. The New International Version.
And what was the scripture that we were talking about?
Exodus chapter 2, the whole chapter. Okay. And so just a couple of different things that we noticed as we're walking through this. First is the term ark. Just recently, not too long ago, as we were looking through our series, the word ark was used when we were talking about Noah, and we were talking about him making a promise. Yes. And then at the end, you see at the end whenever God is, at the end of chapter 2 there, where it talks about God hearing and remembering his people.
Yes.
And so kind of that setup that God is in motion and then all of a sudden remembers. Was there anything specifically in that caught you?
Well, I think what was really cool was the way that you're inspiring us to do Bible study. And so there's these words that you say, this is coming not only just in the scripture, but where else do you see it? And so the words that are on the PowerPoint are ark, and then you've got these other ones you can talk about. The Hebrew newborns being slaughtered, which we see in with Jesus
in the New
Herod
Testament. Yeah.
In the New Testament. We see the encounters at wells and all the different places, and then remembering promises. So
yeah, well, and I remember.
Yeah.
In the sermon yesterday, one of the things I was talking about was, when it talks about God remembering, it's not that God ever forgot.
Right.
You know, it's not like he's sitting around and going, "What was I doing? Oh yeah," you know, kind of like what we do.
But I promised, didn't I?
Yeah, right. Yeah, but there's this time, there's this point, there's this place where God, for whenever we read it in Scripture that says God remembers, it means God began to act on something that he had done earlier. And so we have this tradition, this part that's going on in Exodus chapter 2 that kind of reminds us that we're talking through not just the story of Moses, but we're actually talking through the first testament, the first covenant that God made with his people. And so that's where some of this other stuff starts to really jump in. So you've got a tie backwards to Noah when it talks about the basket being called an ark. And now you've got something else that's going on. You mentioned a moment ago the Hebrew newborns being slaughtered.
Yes.
The reason for that, the Bible study understanding of that is that Pharaoh began to look at how numerous the Hebrews were becoming. And so he felt that if they continued to expand at the rate that they were, that it would not be long before they overtook the Egyptians.
Yeah.
And once they had more numbers than the Egyptians, then they would own Egypt.
And that wasn't good for him.
No, not good for him, especially
or the culture.
Especially Pharaoh, who considered himself a god.
Yep.
If a God can't control the people that he's supposed to have his thumb on,
Yep.
then what kind of God is he really?
Right.
And so you've got that going on. So where else do we know of in Scripture that there is a leader that is scared of the Hebrews and begins to slaughter their children?
And scared of a cultural and social change.
Yeah.
That inevitably does happen.
Yeah, and the Gospel of Luke opens up with that very encounter when we begin to talk about Herod and his desire, and every child under the age of 2 is slaughtered so that this new king can't come to existence.
Yeah.
Something I thought was really interesting when I was walking through this was that where does Jesus go when he leaves the Middle East?
Right back to the story,
back to Egypt. Yeah,
where
and
Moses is. Yeah.
so this place that was the death of the Hebrew culture, or maybe the Hebrew culture was the death of Egyptian culture.
Sure, absolutely.
Even since yesterday, I've been kind of wondering if there's a part of this that says there is also salvation for Egypt. I don't know. So just kind of a cool thing that's where Jesus goes to hide out so that he can come back as a king.
I think, as far as your sermon goes, I think one of the most important things that you went to was looking at the character of Moses and why in the world God chose that guy.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I don't know, I'd love for you to talk about who is Moses.
Sure. Yeah.
Who
Well,
is Moses?
and that's exactly what we launch into in 3 is we see this take of now where we've been given this background of Moses, and we're given a guy who was given up by his birth family. Now it was to save his life, and we can understand that. But he was taken in by an adoptive family, and yet neither were his culture.
Right.
When he was in Egypt, and he was seen by some of the Hebrew slaves the day after he killed the slave driver, the Hebrews referred to him as an Egyptian.
Right.
Now all of a sudden we see him go into Midian,
Which is
where he runs to hide from the Egyptians, and these are Yahweh following people.
Okay.
These are part of the remnant of the Hebrews that did not go to Egypt during the famine.
Sure.
And so you've got this kind of situation that's going on here, where now you've got Moses. Moses has been rejected by his birth family. He's been rejected by his adopted family. He's been rejected by his birth culture, and been rejected by his adopted culture.
He's reject.
Yeah, he's a murderer on the run, a fugitive from justice, and all of a sudden he comes into this land of Midian, and in there he's referred to as an Egyptian. So the Hebrews won't call him Hebrew. The Egyptians won't call him Egyptian. They both consider him an outcast, and this is who God chooses.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. So what about our own background prevents us from seeing ourselves as chosen by God,
Sure.
as called by God? And the reality is, God's not concerned with our past. He's concerned with our future.
And you said that a little differently during the sermon, and it was really powerful. He's not concerned about our past, but our capacity, or or the capability,
what we're
he
capable of.
sees.
Yeah, what we're capable of doing with Him.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a big key factor in this process. We then read through all of Exodus 3. And in
Very
there,
quickly.
very quickly. So you can hit pause on us, and you can go back and you can read Exodus 3. Again, we read it in the NIV, and this is actually where Moses encounters God at the burning bush.
Yeah.
And so these are some of the concepts that I thought sparked a little bit of interest.
And this is kind of the same thing, where you see something and it reminds you of
completely.
something else in God's story.
Yeah, because one of the things we ought to be able to do is
It's a great Bible study.
Right. Well, we've talked about this at church all the time. I don't get a chance to talk to you guys online all that much about this, but we often set aside a specific amount of time that we're going to spend in our Bible each day, or we have this setup kind of a deal where our goal is to actually, we're going to read through the Bible in 1 year, and so we're going to read a psalm, a gospel, and two chapters out of the Old Testament, and we're going to make it through in a year. And I've been through those programs. Those are so structured that you just end up spending time. You don't really get to grow, or at least personally.
Yeah.
Personally, I never found that as a growing concept. So for me, I'm about chasing rabbit trails. I'm going to set aside 30 minutes instead of trying to get through these things really, really fast. And I'm going to chase rabbit trails. And this is kind of how I do that. And it's what helps me to be able to grow and learn and to do things.
So you've got some rabbit trails.
Yeah. So some rabbit trails that I came across was in this, we see something that I think is really interesting. If Moses is the personification of the first testament, of the first covenant with God's people, we have this situation where he has gone from royalty to being a shepherd. He's out in the fields watching his father-in-law.
Yeah.
And that's where God reaches him. We have those same things when we talk about Jesus.
Yes.
You know, he is God's son, which makes him the supreme royalty.
Yeah.
But he is also a shepherd of men. He's here to walk with us and to be with us. And so I think it's really important that we see that in this story. The second concept is the concept of fire. Moses is an interesting character in that we get to see fire played out really 4 different ways.
Okay.
We get to see the burning bush.
Yes.
We get to see fire falling from the heavens as one of the plagues.
Yes.
Fire and ash. We get to see a pillar of fire that is leading him through the wilderness as they're leaving Egypt.
Right.
That's how he's guided at night. Also, that same pillar kind of becomes like a tornado of fire that separates, as we watch the videos, the movies that have come out. But it kind of works as this cyclone of fire that separates the Egyptian army from the Hebrews as they are crossing the Red Sea. And then lastly, we see the fire again, kind of in 2 opposing locations at Mount Sinai.
Okay.
When God speaks the laws, it talks about the tongues of fire that rested on each man, the thunderings and the lightnings that were in the sky and surrounding.
And those things will come up more in later sermons, right?
Right. Yeah.
In more detail.
Yeah. Those are going to come up in 2 weeks.
Okay.
We're going to talk specifically about the Mount Sinai experience.
What was the fire in this week's?
The fire in this week's was the fire that wasn't consuming anything, that was happening at the burning bush. And so we talked about holy ground.
Yes.
That really and truly holy ground is not about finding a specific place, but it's about entering every interaction with God, realizing his holiness.
Right.
And so there's many times we should be taking off our feet.
Yeah.
Taking off our feet. I said that yesterday.
You said it during the sermon.
Taking off our shoes.
That'd be painful.
Yes, it would be so painful. So we're not going to do that. We're not going to ask you to take off your feet. We're asking you to just recognize the sovereignty of the situation when you enter in with God.
You said that God doesn't show up.
Right. Yes.
What does that mean?
We often talk about how when amazing things that God showed up, when the reality is God never left that place.
So we showed up.
Our eyes were opened. We showed up and we met him there. And so I really hope that can become a language change that we have here around the church is understanding that God doesn't show up, but we do.
Yeah.
God was already there.
Yeah.
So we also talk about the name. This is the place where Moses goes, all right, if I'm going to go and talk to the elders of the Hebrews, they're probably going to ask me who sent me.
Right.
And so 3 times, are you looking at the study sheet?
I'm curious.
So 3 times in the story, God reminds Moses that he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
3 separate times he does that. So it's obviously very important. That means I am the God who has walked with them from the beginning. But he tells them that his name is I am. Mm-hmm. I am the great I am. And the way that is written, the way the tense of those verbs is something that's called aorist tense. And it is actually a continual action that never stops.
Yeah.
And so a future participle is about the closest we have in English.
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. I learned it in my Greek and Hebrew classes. But what the name really means is I am who I always will continue to be.
And always was.
And always was. And that's the reminding backwards of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah.
But also in the saying, I am who I always will be, is saying that that he has heard their cries. Yeah. And this would be enough for the Hebrew leaders to know, oh, Moses is speaking truth.
Yeah.
And as we'll see next week, it did.
Nice.
It did. It did set that up. And so the name is important.
Yeah.
The name is important. Also, it kind of ends with this provision. We often think about the finite details. Okay, God, I'll go, but
Yeah.
this has to be figured out, or this has to be figured out. And God goes, I don't need the buts. So let's just figure that out right now.
Yeah.
And so he tells them as they're leaving, ask your neighbor, can I have your silver and gold?
So,
and they're going to give it to you.
Yeah.
And through that method, not through force or through hurt, but
extra
through
jobs and
through that kind of stuff, you will plunder the Egyptians, is the term that it used in the NIV. And so God is a God of provision.
And he's also a God of taking things that were intended for harm for good.
Yeah.
If he's using the Egyptian stuff,
The Egyptian gold and silver.
The very things that were used to enslave the people were used for freedom. One more thought I think that was really important as you closed up was permissive will.
Yes.
and perfect will, which I was confused at first, and then you cleared it up on something.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about that, because this is where we had all this information that is supposed to take us to a place of transformation.
Right.
And so the transformational part for me as I read the story of Moses is so many of us wonder, well, Moses was given this perfect will.
Yeah, he knew exactly what he was supposed to do.
And how is it that
Set
you
my
and I,
people free.
Right. Let my people go. But we, Moses was crystal clear, and you and I in our day-to-day lives, it's often not near that clear, nor that grandiose.
No.
And so what we had within the story was, to me, I felt like we needed to answer the question. John Wesley, one of the early church fathers, talked about two distinct wills when we're following God. There is first the permissive will. And think about it this way. So permissive will is often in life, there are decisions that aren't life-changing.
Right.
They're not altering. Do I take this parking spot or this parking spot? Do I speak to this person or do I get in this line? Or, I'm kind of in a hurry today. What do I do? Working within God's daily will, our permissive will, just means that we're working and we're walking with God.
So we're loving God and loving people the best that we can.
Absolutely.
In general.
And doing our best not to do harm to people and things. And so we're
this is good.
Yeah, we're just paying attention.
Yeah.
But it's walking in the permissive will that often we will find the perfect will. And the perfect will I define this way. What is that job that only Ryan is called to do? What is that job that only Trey is called to do? And it's when we're walking in our permissive will that we will have opportunities for perfect will.
Right.
And that would be, so you're helping out with the youth or you're working with your worship team.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, in one of their lives, something comes up in which they just need advice.
Sure.
And because you have been walking in God's permissive will so long, they trust you with that advice.
Sure.
Well, now they have come to you and you are the only person that can speak into that problem.
Because of walking in God's permissive will, that creates space then.
Yeah, for the perfect will to be shown.
To be shown, sure.
And so that's kind of what I wanted to see. And in Moses, obviously, there has been a lot of permissive will going on. I mean, he landed what we didn't cover in our talk here. That's in chapter 2 is when he gets to the land of Midian. He's at a well, and there's these women that are there that are pulling water for their livestock, and these men come up and kind of push all the women out of the way. Well, that apparently, as we can know from reading the story, is kind of a daily occurrence.
Okay.
Because their dad was really confused when they come home so early because he's so used to them coming home later. And they said, well, there was this dude there, and he drew the water for all of our livestock. Mm-hmm. And because he was a man, he could get right in the midst of it with them, and no questions were asked about that. And the dad goes, well, where's this guy now? Well, we left him at the well. Well, go get it, And so
Just
that's
those little permissive will type
those
things.
little permissive wills. And so because he was willing to help someone, that's his permissive will. Well,
and that created
he helped
space.
the right one that opened up a door for him to go and meet his soon-to-be father-in-law.
Right.
And through that, he's following God's will. He's been taking these few years, because we're not talking a matter of weeks, we're not even talking a matter of months, we're talking 3 to 4 years from the time he leaves Egypt, because we know that while he's in the land of Midian, that the Pharaoh dies. And so what he grew up with as his brother, Ramesses, is now going to be Pharaoh. So things have totally changed. The whole atmosphere of Egypt has changed. And God has been waiting for this time to call Moses, the only one who could, because he's a brother both to the Hebrews and a brother to Ramesses. So it was only through living out the permissive will that he was able to land into this perfect will. And God used this weird, horrible at times, background of dysfunction and misinformation to bring about the perfect person who could speak to both cultures. And that's where I think we're called to.
Yeah.
And so when we think about this and we think about this sermon, to me it led us to that place of discussing living our permissive will in search of our perfect will.
Yeah.
But your perfect will is not always going to look as grandiose as Moses's.
It won't look that grandiose. When I was thinking when you're saying that, a lot of the stuff that I feel could be part of my permissive will seems so silly and worthless and like pointless. And I mean, so what? I smiled at that guy.
Yeah.
And so what? I didn't honk my horn or get angry. Not a big deal. But it was that moment at the well that wasn't a big deal that led to the freedom of God's people. So I don't know what hangs. I think you used this word. What hangs in the balance with our daily walk?
Yeah.
You know,
well,
pay attention.
I wish I could think of the names right now, and at one point in time I had them memorized. But there is actually a distinct lineage from Moody to Graham.
Oh, really?
And it started with a Sunday school teacher.
One Sunday school teacher.
Sunday school teacher. In his permissive will, he had a kid in his class named Moody.
Yeah.
And because of that, Moody Broadcast was started.
Yep.
You know, and then a guy that grew up in Moody's Sunday school class with him, taught Sunday school, witnessed to someone, shared with somebody, who then became a Youth for Christ volunteer that spoke words of wisdom into Billy Graham.
That reminds me of the parable of the mustard seed.
Yeah.
Where, the kingdom grows not quickly, not all by one person, but like one seed that grows very slowly, like a ripple too.
Yeah.
And that's really cool that God can use my little silly little things to
God may not call
do
me to be
so
the
much
next,
more than I can imagine.
Yeah. God may not call me to be the next Billy Graham, but maybe I'm supposed to talk to someone who's going to encourage the next Billy Graham.
Either way.
I mean,
it's you living out your permissive will that gives God the space to grow this amazing.
Yeah. I love Rob Bell talked about it this way in one of his books that was we have the opportunity each and every day to choose one of two things. Either we get to usher in the kingdom of heaven here among us, or we have the opportunity to usher in the kingdom of hell.
It's our choice.
It's our choice. And so in that more modern way of talking about it, it's the same as, are we going to live in the permissive will of today with God so that we have those opportunities?
And then the third one is my will.
Yeah.
We didn't discuss that one much.
No, we didn't discuss that one much because I
everyone
was
gets that
trying
one.
not to lift that one too high.
My will.
But yeah, I mean, so often we give in to what our own desires are. And not that having desires are bad. Actually, our goal is not to abandon my will, but to line my will up with his will.
Yeah.
And that's where you become part of that submissive will.
Nice.
Permissive will, sorry, not submissive.
Sometimes it can be.
It can feel that way.
Should be.
So anyway.
Well, look at that. We ended up making the entire sermon up.
I know, right?
23
Isn't that
minutes.
great? So, guys, I hope that this helps you. Again, I'm so sorry that the sermon actually did not come out the way that we hoped it to, but I really enjoyed doing this with Pastor Ryan, and so thanks, Ryan.
I know it was fun.
really
Maybe we
did.
should do this more often.
I know, right?
Yeah.
We always talk about doing fun things, and this is one of them. So, guys, God bless. Hope you have a great day. And if you have any questions or would like to talk to any of us, feel free to check out our website and shoot us an email. Thanks. Love you guys. Bye-bye.